Hi, and welcome to the next of our webinars. This one's called 7 Steps of Innovation. I'd like to welcome Steve Page, who will be running today's session, and we'll be taking you through the 7 steps of innovation. First of all, just want to say that this workshop is run by Humber Growth Hub as part of the Grow My SME programme. One of the things I want to make people aware of is how to ask questions today. You will see a little questions section on your toolbar. We do encourage as many questions as we can. That's what we're here for, is to try and answer the questions. We'll be looking at these at the end of today's presentation. So what I'd suggest is, if you come up with a question, stick it in that question bit as soon as you possibly can. That will allow us to review the questions and then go through them at the end of today's session. So, without further ado, I'll pass you over to Steve, who will take you through today's workshop. Steve.
Fine, thank you very much, Peter. Welcome all to the 7 steps of innovation for SMEs. We've got quite a lot of information that we've shoehorned into today's webinar. So please feel free to grab a pen and a notepad should you need to jot any particular things down, although I believe the slide pack will be available through the Humber Business Growth Hub on request later. So shouldn't need to take too many minutes. Right, without further ado, then let's sort of dive into to the details. My name's Steve Page. Some of you may or may not know me, and I'm the director of a company called Page Consulting Limited. We're based in the Humber region, and we provide a wide range of business support programs and initiatives, and work closely with companies like Blue Orchid, who are today's facilitators, in support of a variety of different business support organisations, including the Humber Growth Hub. So I sort of come under a number of different categories, sort of engineer, entrepreneur, business owner, although I spend a lot of my time mentoring and coaching businesses to grow rapidly. And innovation is an absolute key part to rapid and successful growth. So I'm hoping to share some of my experiences with you today in view to helping you also use innovation as successfully as you can. A little bit about myself, don't want to rabbit on too much here, but just thought it would help put things into perspective and also give you a little bit of an insight to my career so that you can sort of see where I'm coming from with the approach that we'll be covering today. So my background's in the aerospace industry. I joined as an apprentice in the 1970s, mid-late 1970s, and the company sponsored me to do a degree in engineering systems and control. It was around the time that commercially available PC computing equipment was becoming available, and up until then I'd done a mechanical engineering sort of career path. So it was great to look at and get involved with computer systems and how they might control mechanical equipment. I saw that as the future, and I wanted to be part of it as soon as I could get involved. When I finished my degree and went back to the Brough site, where it was predominantly the family of the Hawk, there was all sort of mechanical rods and levers with that aeroplane. I was a bit of a sort of a square peg in a round hole, and nobody quite knew what on earth to do with me. So they set up this little R&D team and asked me to go away and do some research on how computer systems could be used in aircraft in the future. We got some money from the Ministry of Defence, and off we went. And to cut a long story short, we were able to come up with a variety of different computing architectures, which we had some test flights of, which really sort of pioneered the way for modern fly-by-wire computing technology today. And the development of aircraft that was so highly maneuverable, you couldn't fly them without a computer system involved. So gained a whole raft of patents and really sort of got my interest in innovation and research and development. I was asked if I would head up a small company that produced the training equipment for the Hawk aircraft and some of the flight simulators that went with it. And that was a real pain of a job because it used real aircraft equipment, which was expensive, was always late. And when you had to get your training equipment into the training schools 6 months before the aircraft were delivered, you were just on a failure path. So we radically rethought the whole of that business in terms of the types of products that we wanted. We didn't want the aircraft equipment in there. What we wanted was some cheap and cheerful programmed up PCs that we could get programmed up ourselves and that we could get out into the schools to do some effective training work early, and that we could sell an awful lot more of them because they would be cheaper. And I took what was sort of a £2.5 million business that was just looking at training aids for Hawk into a £100 million plus business in the space of 5 years, which pulled in all of the aircraft for the whole of military aircraft division, and really sort of put a spotlight on my career. I must say I learned more about business in those 5 years than I have done in the rest of my life put together. But I was grey by the time I was 30. So I had a price to pay. My career then sort of moved on to do a series of other senior management roles, which culminated in me heading up all of the R&D programs and research development and technology development programs for the whole of military aircraft, which was a massive job. And it's off the back of that that I then set up my own company to support businesses in this region, really taking what I'd learned from those aerospace days to help businesses move forward. So it's in the context of that I sit here talking to you today and sort of sharing some of the experiences from what I've learned that hopefully will be of benefit to yourselves. So enough about me, not here to talk about me, really to talk about innovation and how well it can be managed with the right leadership and the right processes and structures put in place to help you. So what are we going to cover today? I just want to touch on a couple of definitions. So when I talk about innovation and the likes, you know what I'm talking about. Often with some of these sort of technical topics, there are different interpretations of what a particular term might mean. I also want to touch on innovation projects and why they are so different from ordinary projects. Many people think a project's a project's a project. Well, that might be the case, but it certainly isn't when you talk about innovation projects. They're quite different, incredibly challenging, and if you don't appreciate some of those differences, you may very well come unstuck with your innovation work. So we'll just take a little bit of time out to talk about those and some of the issues that they present. As well as sort of touch on the COVID situation that we're in now and how that has disrupted the market to such an extent that use of innovation may be an incredibly powerful way in order to get businesses back on their feet again. Having sort of set the scene, understood what we're sort of talking about in terminology and also in terms of innovation projects per se. What I then want to do is walk you through what I call the innovation journey. Now, the innovation journey really starts pre-idea, right the way through to that idea being implemented in a product or service that can be launched into the market. What I've done is I've broken that journey down into 7 well-bounded, distinct steps in a way that helps each of the particular phases or stages of the innovation journey to be better understood. My experience working with businesses is that they tend not to have a structured approach as they really would benefit from, and things can be a little bit ad hoc, and you only have to miss 1 or 2 key things in it, and it can bite you in the bum later on. So we'll be spending the bulk of the webinar talking through those 7 steps and giving you a little bit of an insight as to what's involved with them, so that you've got an overview, an appraisal of the start to finish journey. And we'll be looking at the investment phase rather than the post-launch phase. Any questions and answers that you've got along the way, as Peter suggested, just pop them in through the question line, and we will pick them up at the end and have a little bit of a sort of a questions and answers discussion. So I'll do my very best to try and answer any of the questions that that you send through. So that is the frame for today. I've got a couple of hours. What we will do, because you know, if your brain's anything like mine, after about an hour of soaking up information, you tend to get a bit punch drunk with it. So we'll have a short, sharp 5-minute break around about 3 o'clock-ish. So you can recharge your cups, recharge your mugs of tea, pop to the loo if you need to, and then come back with a clear mind, ready to pick up the second part of the webinar. So that's the plan. That's what we're going to cover, and let's start that with looking at the definition of innovation. So, what do we mean by innovation? If this was sort of an interactive webinar, we'd sort of kick a few ideas around and get a number of different views and opinions and be able to sort of get a feel and a scope for just how wide-ranging innovation might be in terms of definition. Again, if you look up in the sort of Wikipedia or Google it up, you'll find a variety of different definitions. The one I sort of use, because it's simple and I can remember it, is the one that is in the Cambridge Advanced Learners Dictionary and Thesaurus. And it's this: that innovation is the use of a new idea or method. So the use of a new idea or method is what I mean when I'm talking about innovation. Now, when we're in business, as we are with small, medium-sized businesses, then what we need to do is put that definition into the context of business. So I'm really sort of referring to innovation in a commercial context. So again, from the Cambridge Advanced Learners Dictionary and Thesaurus, I have used the definition of commercialization. So in the context of business or commercialization, I'm really talking about commercialization being the process of making a product or a service available for sale. So when I'm talking about innovation in the context of business, I'm talking about the use of a new idea or method that would be involved in the process of making a product or a service for sale. Now, innovation itself can have a multiple number of outlets. And creating a product and service for sale is one, and a big primary one, but it's not the only one. In many cases, businesses can gain a real competitive advantage by innovating their own processes, procedures, and methods so that they can improve their performance to give them that competitive advantage. So innovation doesn't have to be only directed towards the development of new products and services for sale, although primarily a large chunk of it is. It can also be directed into the development of or the adaptation of business in order to be able to survive, thrive, and grow. In today's discussions, I'm going to be focusing more on the use of the 7 steps in terms of directing it towards the development of a product or service for sale, but keep in mind that there are these other outlets that innovation can be used incredibly effectively for. And in the context of COVID, I think there will be ample opportunity for innovation in the way that we work, particularly around the social distancing and the protection of our employees and customers, that will create a plethora of innovation opportunities that are here and now if we take the time to look out for them and go for them. So, just wanted to spend a moment explaining what I mean by innovation in a commercial context, and also explain that there's a range of a diverse range of outputs to which innovation can be usefully put towards. So I hope that just sort of sets the scene, and when I talk about innovation, it now conveys that meaning across to you. So, having explained what I mean by innovation, what I want to do now is just take a moment out to frame the innovation journey, which is often undertaken as a series of well-bounded projects. And just have a little look at these, because there's a perception that an innovation project is the same as any other project and that all the same rules apply. And if you are running or managing an innovation project for the first time, you're going to find that that is not the case. So I just want to take a moment to draw your attention to some of the difficulties that you will face above and beyond, because in my experience, innovation projects are the hardest projects that there are to manage. The risks are significantly greater than they would be in a project which is following a process that has been done time and time and time and time before. So let's have a little look at what I'm talking about. So innovation projects, they're different from traditional projects. And again, if we were sort of in an interactive session, we would push around some ideas to sort of see if we couldn't tease out what those differences were. We're not able to do that, so let me just highlight some of those that I think are particularly relevant. For those of you that are experienced in managing innovation projects already, you'll know yourself what they are. And you will also probably have a few more that you could add to my list. So let's just kick off with these. Innovation projects are unique and unclear as to the outcome. Well, of course they are. Nobody's ever had this idea before necessarily, or not that you know of. And you don't know whether or not it's going to work out well, the technology is going to be available in order to implement it. and that nobody has ever quite gone through this specific particular idea development process. So how would you know exactly what to expect and what might happen when you embark upon this? So you've got some significant risk due to the uncertainty and the uniqueness of the particular project that you're doing. And how many times do people get the first project that they've run of a particular type 100% right? You don't. You make all sorts of mistakes along the way, but you learn from them. Another key difference is that innovation projects, because of their reliance on technology in order to be able to work, are subject to rapid changes in technology. If you dither with it or take too long, you may very well find that technology is becoming obsolete before you can properly take advantage of it. Or the direction of the technology might change partway through your project and make it almost impossible to be able to fulfill your goal. Innovation projects use scarce resources. By their very nature, research and creative innovative thinking are not something which are deployed widely across certain industries, and therefore you're taking numbers of people that are, in relative short supply. A greater need for creativity, particularly in terms of the novel and uniqueness of the solution that you're trying to identify and implement. They tend to be knowledge intensive. A lot of research and a lot of understanding needs to have to go into an idea to make sure that it's actually got the potential that you hope from it. And they're also subject to rapid changes in the market. So a market opportunity may open up off the back of, say, COVID, but as COVID then goes through a lockdown easement, the nature of that market may suddenly change again because the rules and regulations have changed. And that poses a very, very tight time window within which you would need to have undertaken and delivered your innovation project if you're going to be able to capture that market. And again, even if the market does change, you may just get there and launch at a time that the market has changed, and therefore the need for what you've done no longer exists or is diminished, and people aren't prepared to pay the price for it. So that whole uncertainty, that fluidity around technology, fluidity around market changes, makes for an incredibly difficult situation that you need to cover through quickly. And that gives you a situation where the boundaries of your project, rather than being hard and clear and you know exactly what the steps are and how long each thing's going to take and when you're going to have finished it and what the critical path might be, that doesn't apply so much. We've got soft, uncertain boundaries with a lot of uncertainty, and that requires agile project management. Again, a skill set that tends to be in quite short supply, and therefore further exacerbates the risks associated with running an innovation project. So you need to be clear when you're putting these things together that you are putting together a plan for what you want to do with a significant amount of uncertainty associated with it. When you look at the statistics associated with innovation projects, what I have just said is borne out. So without trying to depress you too much, just a few quotes that I picked up. KPMG did a survey of 300 large companies, of which they found 65% reported that their innovation projects were grossly over budget, behind schedule, and the technology was not performing. Another quote I pulled out was research conducted by Computer World magazine reported that 1 out of every 2 projects overruns its budget by 180% or more, and failed systems projects cost over $100 billion each year. Another quote, and I won't give you too many, but there are loads to pick at. 31% of a poll of over 8,000 projects were cancelled, whilst only 16% were on schedule and on budget. So it can be done, but there are some rules that you need to follow if you're going to get the success, if you're going to be one of those projects that achieves the success that it's looking out for. We'll touch on the reasons for why I think so many fail as we go through the webinar. So fundamentally, innovation projects need to be well structured, and they need to adopt a highly disciplined approach. It's not desirable, it's essential. Without it, your project will become another failure statistic. So we really need to get our act together when we're doing these things. Otherwise, we're going to waste time, money, effort, and resource and never get to the end of our journey. So having painted a really black picture, we can now focus on what we need to do to avoid those pitfalls and make sure that the projects that you're going to be delivering come through in success. But we also have to do that in the context of the impact that COVID-19 is having, because that's adding yet another layer of difficulty. But it also is providing opportunities, because whenever you get a high degree of market disruption, you get massive opportunities for innovation. So we need to look at the positive opportunities that can come out from COVID and the pressure that our businesses might be under if due to the financial impact that it's had so far. So if your business is one of those that follows the graph that I've just put in front, where the green line represents the sales. So it's been steadily growing in sales right the way up until the end of March, when the lockdown came into play and sales have absolutely plummeted. But you've not been able to get your expenditures right down to zero as well. You've got rates, rent, property, top up for your furlough, a whole load of other expenses that you are committed to having to pay. Your business will be sat there with potentially more going out or liabilities building with very little income to pay for. So the question really we need to be asking is, can you innovate your business back into growth? Can you turn those sales around, get that expenditure back under control, and create a booming business? It might have to adapt, it might be doing different things, but it's a business back on its feet that's making money. That's the question that you need to be asking. In fact, really, not can you, how do you? And that's what I'm wanting to spend today's webinar around. How can you innovate your business back into growth? And the way that you do it is you understand the innovation journey, which are broken up into 7 distinct steps so that we can walk through each step and give you a feel for it, that will enable you to run a successful innovation project on things that will have a potentially large return on the investment that you put in, and that will be available to you so that you can turn the business around quickly, but also have longer term future prospects that you can bring to bear. So I'm going to talk to you about the innovation journey and the 7 steps that are involved. Before we touch on the 7 steps, I just want to sort of give you a little bit of an insight in terms of what's involved in the innovation journey, and sort of typically some finances that might be involved in that to set the scene so that you can then understand how the 7 steps fit in and why they are what they are and the order that they run. So, simple little graph. On the vertical, we're looking at money, and on the horizontal, we're looking at time. So we would start off with our initial investment into our innovation project, and that innovation project will cost us money. So I've shown it in the red, and it's money that we will be investing. With the view that by launching that product and service, we could get a significant return on the initial investment that we've made. There may still be some further investments we have to make in order to get the exploitation to its full, but fundamentally, we need to be looking at creating this sort of situation when we decide to put an innovation project together. And so many projects get so absorbed by the idea and how brilliant it is, they don't do enough work on understanding what the size and opportunity of that investment exploitation side of the journey looks like, the blue line. And they're unable to generate the sort of returns that I think they would ideally hope for. So we need to step back and fundamentally look at the journey as consisting of 2 parts. The first part is the investment part, and this webinar is what we're going to be focusing on, the investment phase of the project. We'll touch on the exploitation side, but really that fundamentally comes under a separate webinar, which is all about scaling up business. So our innovation journey in full consists of 2 parts, and there is a significant amount of work that we need to do in the investment phase to understand what the exploitation phase will deliver for us. Because if it's not going to deliver the goods and we don't have a decent chance of really exploiting it, we've got to ask the question, why would you want to do it? So let's just put the spotlight on the investment phase. Let's have a little look at the cycles, and let's just have a quick chat about that overall journey. And the way I like to sort of visualize it is if you imagine the investment phase as being of the innovation journey as being a funnel, which sort of has 2 parts. There's the sort of cone bit that sits at the top, and then there's a spout bit that runs down the bottom. Each part of it performs a different role and therefore requires us to do different things in it. So if we take our funnel, what we're looking at is at the top, pulling in a whole series of information and intelligence associated with the markets and opportunities our ability to exploit an idea. We're looking at generating ideas, evolving those, and creating and selecting innovation opportunities. And that's what the top half of the funnel is all about. It's data processing, it's understanding, it's making decisions. The spout, however, that's when we select something that we think ticks all of the boxes and warrants the investment, and we drive an innovation project out from that through to a market launch with a good amount of evidence that will support a high degree of exploitation from that situation. So in terms of the 7 steps, we can chart them in terms of the journey from the top of the funnel right the way through to coming out of the spout at the bottom, the market launch. So the first step, right at the very, very top, the rim of the funnel, is what we call horizon gazing. We'll go into a bit more detail on each of these as we go through. The second stage is scoping. So we've identified some potential areas that might look like they're worthy of more attention. We can then sort of bound them and scope them up so that we can concentrate on those. Those that look like they've got some potential, we can put some definition into them so that we've got a really good, clear understanding of exactly where we're looking and at what time in the future we might be looking, or even in the present. You may join this process at different points in the funnel. So you might not be an organization that's looking at those future quantum leap changes, but you might be looking more closer term to incremental innovations of existing products and services that just make them that little bit better, in which case you must probably be coming in either on the scoping or definition phase. Discovery is the fourth bit. This is the bit that most organizations jump over. They bypass it, but it's the bit that bites them on the bum when they do that, because it is the bit that fundamentally checks out the level of potential that's associated with the particular innovation opportunity that you might have identified. It's the bit that says we've got the confidence to be able to put some money into this idea because we think it's got legs and there's a great opportunity to exploit it in the marketplace. It's the trigger, the filter that enables you to put something into the spout and invest massively in that innovation project. And the reason why so many fail is because discovery is not done properly. So we're now going into the spout. We've selected a particular innovation project that we believe we want to go forward with, and we're into development. So that is the bit that everybody sort of associates with an innovation project. You're building your prototypes, and you're testing them out, you're sort of seeing what technology is around. We'll touch on it in more detail. Into demonstration, we've got something that sort of ticks all of the boxes, so can we put a commercial version together and start hawking it around and getting some interest? And then the launch, which is the 7th stage, which is that moving across into the exploitation phase. So it's those 7 steps that enable you to, bit by bit, work your way through that funnel in a controlled and structured way that can make the difference between success and failure. And that's what we'll be spending the rest of the time on today. So let's just have a little look at sort of a typical project in financial terms and what that might look like before we dive into any of these sections, because there's just a little bit more background information that I think will be helpful to you. So if we take our investment and exploitation curve. And we focus on just expanding that investment phase, that initial investment phase, that innovation project. Let's have a little look at what it can look like. So again, just sort of shown graphically, on the horizontal axis we've got time, and on the vertical axis we've got money. What we can do is we can chart the 7 steps through time. So our first stage, horizon gazing, through to scoping, selecting an area to focus on, through to putting some real definition and boundary around that so that we can research it properly, to undertaking a detailed investigation to satisfy ourselves whether it ticks all the boxes or not, before we then launch into the expensive part, the development and the demonstration phases leading up to a product or service launch. Now, if we were to sort of look at just a small little modest innovation project and the sort of costs and timescales that we might incur, it might be reflected sort of along the lines of this curve here, where the red line is charting the amount of money that we're spending over each of the stages. So horizon gazing and scoping tend to be stuff that should be going on in the background anyway. It doesn't really cost a great deal of money. It's just the time that you're spending doing some sort of research, following particular individuals that might be doing horizon gazing and sharing what they're seeing, looking at future trends and the likes. So I've not really put any cost to that directly. You would start to pick up some costs around definition. So I've just put sort of a modest amount of somebody's time in for that, where they're looking at a couple of areas that they might want to have some boundary setting and clarification, definition putting in place. When we're coming into discovery, there's often quite a lot of work involved in this, a lot of desk research, a lot of information gathering and analysis, because this is the bit that determines whether we're going to go ahead with the project or not. So sort of typically put about 8 grand. They're just indicative numbers. It could be 10, it could be 12, it could be 5, but just to sort of give you a flavour for it. Let's assume that we tick all the boxes and we've now invested a small amount of money, you know, under £10,000, to identify or to determine whether a particular idea might have legs and we want to go for it. Let's assuming it does, and we've not abandoned it, many of which will be abandoned, would never go beyond this point, or should be, let me say. Some of the statistics why so many fail is because this isn't done properly. So moving into development, like I say, some modelling, some technology evaluations, some prototype building, leading on to a commercial version of that, subject to there being no showstoppers that we find. Now, it's a bit of a grey area between development and demonstration. They sort of merge into one. So you just sort of need to draw a line around where you think that criteria is. The demonstration isn't just the technical work, but really we're getting our branding, our websites, a lot of that exploitation, paraphernalia and assets in place ahead of the launch, so that we've got it all there for when we do launch. There's also supply chain development and quite a bit of the sort of promotional side of things that sort of sit between the two. So when you just sort of tally it up, you got, you know, 250,000 pounds worth of investment. Now, if you hadn't gone into this properly and you've got a budget for 100,000, you're going to run out of money partway through this, and then you're going around trying to drum up finance to try to pay for the rest of it, and that can bring a whole series of difficulties as well, particularly if you haven't done your homework in the upper part of the funnel, because then investors see a greater risk with you and are going to lay down greater conditions or want more equity share as part of any money that they might want to provide. So let's just say it all goes smoothly. We were able to raise sufficient finance as we went through it, and we've got a £216,000 investment case. There may be some things that go wrong along the way, so having a £250,000 pot in order to do it might be a safer bet, because things do tend to overrun, or we underestimate the amount of work that's required. So that might be a typical program, and we can plan it out ahead, knowing what's involved in each stage, getting a feel for what sort of costs and time and assets might be needed. We could come together with a reasonable ballpark estimate, and we could put an innovation plan or an investment plan together, and we can look at how much money we want to be borrowing from who and under what conditions in order to bring it through. So having got to that launch point, what we can then do is we can have a little look at the exploitation side of the curve. So typically, we would see a sales exploitation through sales coming through, and we might sort of realize some notional figures that have come out from our market surveys and business planning projections. Now, doing some analysis around that, you know, the 1.685 million in comparison to the 216,000 invested, one divided by another gives you a ratio of 7.8, 8-ish. So you've got an 8 to 1 multiplier in terms of sales. But that's a bit of a false reading, because really what you're wanting to be looking at is the hard-nosed profit that you end up with at the end of it. So if you have 15% profit on that, in those sales, then you're only looking at a 1.2 times recovery rate. And if there's further investment that you need to put in to generate that level of sales, then you could be seriously in a situation where you barely recover the investment that you put in. And you've got to ask yourself, why would you want to put yourself through that situation? What you really need to be doing is generating a exploitation curve that is looking something like this. And that may very well, the difference between the two may very well come from the opportunity for intellectual property protection, patenting, trademarking, and other things, which mean that your sales aren't being diluted because copycats can get in there and steal a chunk of the sales away from you. It may also mean that there are certain customer groups that you might need to target, to which they have specific unmet needs that this is trying to meet, and that you have factored that into the design and development and the product service that you have. So really, you need to keep a very, very close eye on the exploitation outcome that you're trying to achieve, and that should drive your investment decisions during the investment phase. Otherwise, you're going to end up losing money and putting a whole lot of effort into something that really has not delivered the output for you that you would have liked. And so many businesses find themselves with that first underachieving sales performance rather than the latter one, which can give you a really good return on that investment. So those are the things that you need to consider in the context of innovation projects, and really have all culminated in the design and the development of the 7-step process that we're going to be looking at now. So I hope it just gives you a little bit of a feel for why it's come about, not just some fad or nice to have, but an absolutely essential process that helps you to tip the balance back in your favour that otherwise would have been working against you. So, 7 steps of innovation. Step 1, top of the funnel, pulling in market intelligence and trying to gain that as far out as we might reasonably see. So what is horizon gazing? What's involved with it? Why do you want to do it? Some businesses and hopefully those that are listening today will be already doing this and have capabilities in their business for it. Others may not, but you might not need it because horizon gazing isn't something that is needed in every situation. It's really looking for the big quantum leaps in the future, and I'll give you some examples of that in a minute. What's it all about? I mean, if you want to sort of look at the best of the best in terms of horizon gazing, go to the universities because they are masters at it. They have got high caliber people who know exactly how to do this, and they do it very, very well indeed. So it's about looking into the distance, out into the future to gain an early awareness of where things might be going, what the trends are, what that sort of future might be. Fundamentally, to sort of help you to try and identify the next big thing. If you want to get a phenomenal exploitation curve from the investment that you put into an innovation project, then doing that with the next big thing and protecting the IP well is exactly how you go about doing it. But it's a bit of a longer term game because it takes time for that future to come about. But if you're looking at it, you're prepared for it and you're ready, you've got a good chance of being able to do that. So you can start to set your stall out for the future, even though some of the things you do in the interim may be shorter term. One of the ways that you can do that is by looking at innovation waves, and I'll show you one of those in a minute. So it's about research, looking at potential future problems and trends that might exist in the future, new needs that might arise as a result of it. We've got 7 billion humans on the planet at the moment. That's rocketing up. We'll be 8, 9, 10 billion soon, and they're all consuming resources of this planet. Combined with the global warming that we've got going on and the need for decarbonisation, you can start to sort of see areas where there may be some phenomenal change that might need to be made, that you can start to explore and position more readily. So you're really looking for selecting markets that are rich in opportunity for innovation. Some of those markets might not exist at the moment, but as a result of the sort of future pressures that I've just outlined, may become more and more and more dominant as time goes by. So that's what future gazing is about, and it's all about really trying to get yourself positioned in the longer term for phenomenally high exploitation curves off the back of a relatively modest investment phase. So I mentioned innovation waves. And these are things that you can start to use to help you get that little bit of an understanding as to what's gone on in the past and the direction of travel that we might have for the future. Some of you will have seen these before. This is fairly standard one, and this is a generic one. And what it does is it looks at time along the bottom. So we see sort of 1785, the first recorded wave, was all about the introduction of iron, water power, mechanization, textiles and commerce. And that lasted 50, 60 years before the second wave started to come in, which was then building upon the ironworks in terms of improvement of iron into steel, the use of steel in terms of generating steam power, and the sort of production of cotton that brought phenomenal wealth into the country. That moved on then to electricity, chemicals, internal combustion engine. And what you see with these things is that each wave builds on the wave previously, and those waves potentially have greater levels of innovation in them, but it's a shorter period of time before the next wave comes in and supersedes them. And we're currently on the 6th wave at the moment, with the 7th wave due out in sort of 2025 onwards. And you'll sort of see some of the areas that they're identifying could be the next big things. Renewable energy is down there, which for this region is absolutely key. But there's a whole load of others that are there, and there may very well be others that aren't on that list that the future gators are looking at. So we can see that that phenomena. We can tap into the work that's being done. We can start to see where the big opportunities are. And if renewable energy is something which the Humber region is big on, and it is, then already we're well positioned to be tapping into innovation in something that there is a great future for. So that's a little bit about horizon gazing. I could go on for hours around this. It's such a fascinating topic. But I just wanted to sort of set the scene for you. With this 7 steps of innovation, there is a series of support programs that run where I'm able to work much more closely through each of the stages with individual companies to help them on that journey. And that's a program that's been running for quite a number of years very successfully. So I think the Humber Business Growth Hub have support grants and programs in place, as do some of the other organisations, Spark Fund through the University of Hull, and the Flood Resilience Programme have got monies for supporting grants as well. So there may very well be opportunities for you to work through these organisations that can help you to engage in innovation projects. Right, so looking at the second bit then, innovation opportunity scoping. We'll have a break shortly. I just want to touch on this sort of quickly. So this really is following on from the horizon gazing, and it's sort of picking out and spotting those market rich, those market areas that are rich in innovation opportunity. So as we've just been talking about renewable energy, decarbonisation, and the ability to start to gain control over the global warming that's taking place, I think is going to become bigger and bigger and bigger, and there'll be some phenomenal opportunities that come off the back of that. So scoping is really trying to understand where to be looking. So it's doing that market research, it's understanding the trends, and it's looking for these potential innovation opportunities. So we're looking for quantum leaps. These waves of innovation can help us to identify those. And we are looking for the sweet spots, the ones that we believe we might be able to engage in, that we can make a real contribution and have a phenomenal exploitation curve coming off the back of an investment that we make. We're also looking at determining enabling technologies. Ideas tend to be regurgitated and reused time and time again. What's different isn't the idea or the concept, because they are a response to a fundamental need. It's the technology platform that they use in order for them to gain the functionality that is needed in the modern age. So the technology is the key to enabling an idea to become functionally fulfilled as we go forward. And some things which may not have been achievable before, as a new technology comes online, it can be reached. So we are looking at where we are with the technology. Have we the means by which we can take an idea and implement it? And how strong are those unmet market needs that would warrant somebody to want to pay something, pay money to have that particular thing that satisfied a need that otherwise hadn't been completely or fully satisfied previously. So those are the sort of conditions that we're looking for, and scoping helps us to now pull out those sweet spots where there may very well be an opportunity to introduce a fundamentally new concept with a new technology platform that gives us an ability to create a great exploitation response. So just on those innovation waves, what you can do is you can use the wave back to look at a particular product or service and its history and its evolution. So what I've done here is I've been looking at sort of gazing out into the future, where some of the really, really big markets are that get bigger and bigger and bigger each year on. And one of those is do-it-yourself or DIY tools, particularly the hand tools, powered hand tools. That market sits at £2.5 billion a year and is growing and has been growing year on year. And yet there's a relatively small number of suppliers of equipment in that marketplace that are competing with each other. Absolutely phenomenal opportunity for an inventor to come in and break through. So I just selected out from that a sweet spot that I'd identified. My power of my laptop's going, so let me just plug myself in. Which was drills, and I went back and did some scoping research to try to understand the history of that. And I've dropped it into a wave type situation to help me to explore what the opportunities for the future might be. What I suggest we do is we just take a short break for literally 5 minutes, just grab a brew, and we'll come back and I'll touch on this a little bit more, and then we'll work our way through the remaining parts of the 7 steps. So what time is it now? It's I make it 10 past. So if you could literally take 5 minutes out and come back, and we'll reconvene in 5 minutes time. So I look forward to seeing you back here again then. Right, okay. 5 minutes is up by my clock, so I hope you've had a chance to recharge and just get back in front of the computer again. So we were talking about using these innovation waves to help us to start to sort of scope out areas that we might be interested in. Now, if I just can go back to the slide that we were looking at. Some of you who aren't familiar with sort of DIY hand tools won't know what these particular devices are here. So I've got some examples that I can give you. I'll just get my video back on again. That sort of just helps you to sort of see the stages of development, how these particular products have evolved, and therefore how they may continue to evolve in the future. And you can apply this process to any product that you want, but you need to do the research to do it. So right back sort of 200-300 years ago, the sort of hand tool that was sort of commonly used by joiners, let's see if I can get that right, is this thing called a hand brace. So it had a bit in the end, and you basically rotate it round in order to be able to drill a hole. And as you can see, the end's wobbling all over everywhere, and you can't really get very much speed up. You can cut through soft woods, but it's not going to really enable you to cut any hard materials at all. So from sort of drilling holes, this was the tool that you had. Now, sort of 150 years ago or so, the need to drill holes in harder materials really started to come into play. So the unmet needs with this thing was its wobbliness in trying to drill a straight hole, but also the fact that the cutter speed was relatively slow, because even if you spun it round quite quickly, you couldn't get the speeds that you would need to drill into harder materials. So there was a quantum leap in rethinking that particular product out. And what it was replaced by was a geared drill. So the unmet need, the speed of the cutter, was solved by introducing this gear wheel. So for one rotation of the gear wheel, which has a 6:1 cog ratio, you could rotate the bit 6 times faster. So now suddenly with this, you've got the means by which you can really cut through some much harder materials with a slightly modified drill bit. And the difference between the two is absolutely phenomenal. No comparison at all. And this solved the greatest shortfall that this had. So we've seen this sort of step change, this quantum leap taking place. What then ensues is a whole series of incremental innovations that then try to improve this. So what you get is something that looks like this, which has a shoulder brace on it, so you can steady the drill, and when you're spinning it round, you get a greater steadiness. So you've got the speed and the steadiness that were the two main shortfalls, the unmet needs associated with the brace. Now, moving further forward, about 100 years ago, the electric motor was invented, and this isn't an early version, this is quite a modern one. What you got was a powered handheld device with an electric motor in it that you could spin around. The early ones were made out of a lightweight aluminium metal case, but when they got wet, you got electrocuted. So they moved to the plastic, lightweight, robust polycarbonates. Very powerful, connect them to the mains, and they still use the same chuck with a chuck key. Highly dangerous if you left it in and turned it on, because it'd fly out and hit you in the face. But again, lots of accessories, incremental innovation started to come into play in terms of different speeds on the trigger, different directions, different types of usage. There's a hammer drill for drilling through brick, there's one for metal, you could use it as a screwdriver. All sorts of additional functionality came into play. Extra grips for steadiness, but they fundamentally had an unmet need in that you needed to have connection to a 240 volt mains supply, so that on building sites the cables were a trip hazard. 240 volts supply all over everywhere. They did introduce a step-down transformer system to 210, but then there's even more bits of kit to fall over and trip over. So the real shortfall for these things was the mains lead. So the next innovation, the next wave of innovation, designed out the lead and introduced what you're more typically familiar with today, a device that doesn't have a lead, but it has a rechargeable battery. So lightweight, usable, rechargeable battery. Again, lots of the functions, but now we're seeing a change to the chuck. It's a chuckless fit, so you don't need the little screw thing on it. You just fasten it tight and it locks it up. So again, incremental innovations taking place to improve the fundamental basic concept. So the question is, what's the next generation of drill going to look like? Each one is significantly different from another in terms of the waves, but carries a lot of the functionality and benefits through as well. So fundamentally, what is the greatest unmet need for this? Because understanding that and solving it in a new invention can open you up to a phenomenal marketplace. And beyond that, what might be the future generation? Is it the fact that you've got a conventional mechanical bit and every size hole requires you to change it? Are we looking at something which could be adjustable without having to change it? Is it the fact that you create a whole series of debris? When you drill a hole, all the dust goes all over everywhere. What is it that people find most problematic with these? And therefore, what solution will be needed to overcome that? And will people be prepared to pay the extra money for it in terms of swapping to it instead of this? So those are the sort of questions that we're wanting to try to get answers to. And looking at those generations and how the unmet needs have been met and delivered in a completely new form of product gives you an indication as to what that next generation drill might look like. And beyond that, whether there are technologies such as energy beams that you might have. So instead of having an electric motor that spins a chuck with a mechanical cutter in it, would you simply have a handheld device that has an energy beam that dissolves a hole into whatever material that you're wanting to have? And therefore, what technology will we need in order to be able to make that a reality? So with the scoping, we're trying to shape up and focus on those aspects of that particular product that will help us to move the thing further forward. And when we start to do some research, what we need to do is really be quite clear. We need to define the specifics of what we're looking for so we can really get sort of stuck into the detail. And that's what the step 3, the third step, is about. It's about really focusing in on defining the specifics of what it is that we're looking for. So it's generating and defining novel ideas that could resolve those key unmet market needs. So we would do some research on the cordless drill and really try to understand what were those particular things that were problematic or users would want to have it do that it's currently unable to achieve, and what sort of technologies might be required in order to be able to implement them. So as we understand the challenge, the problem that we're trying to overcome in terms of functionality, the technology, but also the market need, because that is so key to the size of the exploitation response, that blue curve. Those are the sort of key questions that we're now really trying to get our heads around in this particular stage. So we're coming down the funnel. At the top, we had some sort of vague ideas of where the big money was likely to be. DIY tools came out from one of those. We're then sort of starting to scope it up and looking at hand drills in particular. What we're now trying to do is understand the specifics of how that product has evolved and what the areas of key importance, of key focus are that will enable us to stimulate a variety of ideas. Now, I find one of the problems in inventing a number of things myself, I'm guilty of this, is that I'll be thinking about a particular problem and a solution will come to mind. And I'll sort of kick it around in my head and evolve it, develop it, and I'll like it. And it's like, right, that is the answer to this particular problem. And I sort of own it and defend it. But what I've learned is the first ideas I come up with are often not the best. So what we need to be doing is we need to be understanding what a variety of ideas might be that we could then compare and contrast and measure so we can select the best ones out. So with this definition phase, it enables us to overcome that age-old problem of inventors coming up with one particular solution and just sticking to it. Whereas others that adopt this approach more readily may very well find that they have a variety of ideas and they can find one that's even better. And when it gets to market, guess which one's going to sell. So that's what this process is all about here. So we're looking at identifying and creating innovation ideas that will overcome key unmet needs that might use technology platforms which are not requiring too much development and that have the potential for giving us a really big exploitation curve as a result of the investment that we put in. So we're bounding, scoping those ideas for ease of exploration and also trying to understand what the technology requirements would be for them to work. Now, we use a system, it's very commonly used, called technology readiness levels. Again, some of you will be very familiar with these, others maybe not so. But it gives us a guide for how well developed and mature a technology might be. And therefore, what amount of time and effort and money may still be required to go in to develop it for the idea that you have to be able to work using that technology. They're on the second sort of definition of the scheme now. There was an initial one, but it's been superseded. So there are now 9 TRL levels as identified in this particular chart. So right at the very sort of bottom level, a technology that is very immature and hasn't really had a lot of development. If that's where the technology currently was that you needed for the idea that you might want to implement, you'd be looking at sort of a TRL level 1 or 2, where you've got sort of very basic concepts that you're trying to formulate and use. Other technologies may be way more mature, and it's just a matter of then testing them out in the lab and then testing them out in other more representative environments that are getting closer and closer to the operational environment that you would want these things being used in the marketplace. So you can sort of give a TRL rating level to the technology. That again will help you in terms of the amount of money, time and effort, resource and specialist skills that you might need to bring to bear in order to get a technology up to a level that you would then be able to launch your product. So step 4, discovery. This is the last stage in that top part of the funnel, where we're really fundamentally now trying to understand the specifics of an innovation opportunity, of whether or not we think it's got all the potential to warrant a significant investment in putting it down the spout and throwing a lot of money in terms of trying to get it to market. Better to have filtered out and weeded out all of those that don't really look like they're going to tick all the boxes or carry a significantly high risk with a potential for a low exploitation response. Therefore, we invest in the ones that we believe that are going to give us the greatest bang for our buck, the ones that will give us a really, really high exploitation sales opportunity, albeit that we need to protect the IP around it. So discovery is that phase. It is really shaking down now, what's that market look like? Who else has come up with this idea before? Where would we be infringing existing IP? Has this been explored and got nowhere and failed? Why did it fail? Why have people abandoned these projects before? You know, all of the nitty-gritty detail associated with this innovation opportunity, shaking it down now rather than doing it in parallel with the development. So we're £110,000 in and we suddenly find somebody else has got a patent for it. Or we discover a report where 5 years ago somebody took it down exactly the same journey and it fundamentally didn't work. So let's find out this stuff now before we throw the money into it. That's what this particular stage is all about. So it's that rigorous investigation of each idea to determine its uniqueness and its market potential. So we're reviewing and selecting ideas, weeding out the rubbish, pulling out the best. We're searching knowledge databases, we are refining the ideas with some further creative thinking, and we're prioritizing and selecting. This is the final step before it goes into development. This is your last chance to save yourself from a whole load of grief. And this is the phase that more often is bypassed and it isn't done up front, but is done later on, much later on, when significant time and money and effort have already been poured into it. And because of that, you see this incredibly high failure rate for innovation projects. It's going to be high anyway because they're so challenging, but exceptionally high. Now, during discovery, we start to become multi-disciplined, multi-focused. It's not just the product or service and the technology associated with it. It's not just the proof of technical concept that we're wanting to satisfy, albeit that that's important. We not only want to know that we can make it do what we want it to do with a technology that is safe and affordable, but we also want to know that there's going to be a market for it, and that's going to be a really, really good market that's likely to have some maturity time with it. But we need to do it quickly, and unless we've got lots of money floating around to invest ourselves, we're likely to have to need to access finance from the banks, financial institutions, investors, friends and family, wherever we can get access to grants and other support schemes which enable us to be able to fund that whole innovation journey. We can't get the £250,000 budget that we need for a £216,000 plan. We're therefore going to run out of money part way through. It's never going to get to market. What's the point starting? Access to finance is absolutely key. And the confidence that investors and banks have is massively influenced by how you've gone about doing the research so far, as well as the potential of the idea and the sort of size of market and the risks that you can bring to bear. So there's some documentation that's needed, innovation plans, business investment plans, and a variety of other documentation that will come out from the discovery phase that puts you in a position to be able to have the budget that you're going to need in order to be able to see this program through. Also, there's quite a bit of legal stuff that's involved in this, particularly around the protection of your ideas, your IP, and how you can go about protecting that. Patents aren't cheap and they can cost a lot of money to defend. So is that the route you want to go, or are there other means by which you want to do that? Locally, Hull Library have got a business and IP centre which is connected directly to the IPO, the Intellectual Property Office in London, and the British Library, and they've got software and facilities which can enable you to do all sorts of patent searches and IP checks, and as well as get some advice on the legal side of some of the challenges that will come out. So you're really needing to look at this from a multi sort of parameter perspective, so that we're not just concentrating on the technical bit, but we're looking at the whole of the project in its entirety. And business planning, that marketing support, is going to be absolutely key. I tend to use, although there are lots of different ones around, a platform called the Business Model Canvas, which has been developed by a company called Strategizer. And again, there are businesses that are licensed to be able to deliver this and support this, the library being one of them. That enables you to step back and fundamentally get some information to 9 key parameters that will help you put your business plan together, which are the 9 that I've identified there. And right the way through to the value proposition, which is what is it that you're offering, and what is the perceived value associated with it, that would warrant somebody would then pay money in order to be able to have it. Right the way through to the sort of customer relationship, areas of the market you want to focus on, the distribution channels, how you get it out to market, combined with some of the sort of financial side of it as well, key partners and other resources that might be needed. So it gives you a really, really robust, rounded view for all of the parameters that you might want to look at in terms of putting a business plan together. So this is really the chance to fundamentally research the opportunities that you shortlisted and satisfy yourself, but create the documentation that will enable you to raise the finance and have the confidence to be able to put an innovation project together that's got a fighting chance of actually coming through the other end and you getting a really, really good return on it. So that's the importance of discovery. So as we go into step 5 now, development, we're into that sort of well understood, well established stage of an innovation process. We're going into the spout with an idea that, if you've been following these stages so far, would have been very well researched, understood, and you have a clear understanding with some high levels of confidence that you've got something that's going to be really big. If you haven't done it, you go into the development phase at significant risk not having done that work. And in my experience, what tends to happen is a business will come up with a good idea and go straight into development. And they'll try and do some of those other stages in parallel or a bit later on. I'll say no more. Right, development. So, as you might expect, it's that research, designing, building, testing a variety of models and prototypes under different conditions in order to prove the concept. Working the technology readiness levels up, evolving the functionality and combining the unmet needs, knowledge with the functionality of what you're trying to do. So you're really going to be hitting the target clients that you're looking for with something that there is just not available in the marketplace currently, because it does all of the things that you want a device to do that what's currently around is not doing for you. And some of the sort of stuff that you expect to see during this phase, you're developing schemes and designs to meet particular innovation needs, you're optimizing and selecting the designs for prototyping, building, testing, and the further development iterations that will go with that. But you're also looking multidimensionally, as we've just been talking about, so you're performing your market evaluations, generating your business plans and your business cases and your investment cases. But you're also now starting to clear the way for some of your IP. So what's that intellectual property protection strategy? The discovery phase should have already identified whether you have, whether there are patents in this area or not, where there might be a risk of infringement, or whether you're in clear blue water and you have an opportunity to be able to put a variety of patents together. So that's going to be starting to undertake that development work with the view that as the clarity around the product starts to come into shape, the various claims that you're wanting to make can go into your patent submissions. Really important stage, but can be quite expensive as well. So moving on to the 6th out of the 7th stage, assuming that the prototyping went well, that all of the sort of ticks have been put in the boxes, that you've been able to secure the finance to be able to get it all the way through to market. You've now got a set of prototypes and test results which are meeting the functional requirements. It looks like the costs are going to come out about where you want them to. You can now go into creating the final commercial version that you're going to want to launch. So this is the commercialization of the product development that has been going on so far. So you're using the knowledge gained to design and produce commercially viable products and services that meet all the customer requirements and develop your supply chains and your distribution channels and the like. It may also be that what you are doing is not using the innovation for a product or service to be launched to market, but you are trying to make a series of innovative changes in your business. Again, this will be readying them for that final introduction and implementation stage. So the sort of stuff that's going on here in that commercialization is you're building and demonstrating commercially viable working versions, and you're starting to prepare the ground with key customers that you would be wanting to line up. You may have been talking to these from the discovery stage, maybe even earlier, but through sort of non-disclosure agreements and the like. But now really you're sort of getting things ready to be launched. You're preparing all the branding, the marketing, the promotional strategies for launch. You're sort of getting all of that in place. So there's all of the operational supply chain development, distribution channels, outlets, everything really sort of starting to be ready for you to then sort of dive into that final stage, which is the launch. So again, a lot of you will be very familiar with this. It's actually preparing for and introducing a new product or service or a process into the marketplace. So, you know, you're securing your business operations and having your resources available to meet forecast demands. You're producing your marketing campaigns and you're launching them and fundamentally going live. So you've got all of that sort of marketing collateral, websites, brochures, branding, networks, and the likes, social media content, all of the sort of stuff that's getting the word out. Might be a series of press releases, articles. You know, you are hyping this particular launch. It's the best thing since sliced bread, and you're wanting to make sure that the world and his wife know about it. So that's sort of fundamentally that sort of kickoff and ends the transition from the investment phase through into the exploitation phase. So sort of in summary, what we have done is we've walked through the innovation journey right from the point of sort of collecting market intelligence through to launching a product or service that has the potential for significant financial exploitation. And we have looked at a number of stages with sort of gateway criteria that you could use in terms of structuring an innovation project, or in terms of structuring a process for your R&D, innovation and technology development teams that will enable you to step by step work through the upper part of the funnel, which is all about really trying to identify and tease out the very best innovation opportunities that you can. And then the spout of the funnel, the development and demonstration and launch of those ideas into the market. We've talked through how that can be done in these 7 key steps, from horizon gazing, looking out into the future and and using techniques like innovation waves to help us to sort of pinpoint areas that are of, potentially being the next big thing. And that's where the scoping side of things comes out. Again, when you're starting to do some research, you don't want things that are going to be very vague and ambiguous. You really need to try to sort of bound them and define them more precisely so you can focus your research efforts into those. And that's what the definition phase is doing, or stage is doing for you. Having done that and it's still looking viable, what you're then doing in discovery is absolutely shaking down everything to make sure that you're not taking a lame duck project through a very expensive and time-consuming process. You're shaking it down, you're understanding exactly what's going to be involved, you're putting your plans, your documentation together, you're thinking across a number of different things, proof of concept, proof of market, access to finance, intellectual property protection, a variety of legal frameworks and issues, so that when you do select the innovation project to go forward, and you drive that through development, demonstration and launch, which is an incredibly expensive process, you're doing so having put yourself in the best possible position to succeed and choosing an area of the market that's likely to give you a phenomenal exploitation response. So I hope that's just sort of set things in place for you. There are detailed programs that support each of the various stages and all sorts of capability and tools and techniques associated with them that can be applied to different industries and different situations that fall outside of this webinar, but at least you're available, at least you're aware of that, should you need to tap into them. And there are grant schemes and organisations around that may very well be able to support you with that. So we had a little look at what the sort of innovation process and the costings might look like coming through those stages. And we saw some sort of typical orders of magnitude of cost and roughly timescales in terms of that investment phase. That would enable you to put an innovation project plan together and identify the individual activities and costs and timescales associated with each of the stages, and therefore give you a reasonably well-bounded innovation project, if there is such a thing, in terms of moving forward. But most importantly, because you wouldn't want to go through all of that investment, hard work, energy, and the likes, if there wasn't going to be a really good exploitation response open to you for that. What we don't want to be doing is underprotecting or misjudging the market or the unmet needs, and therefore falling short on our sales and profitability. We really want to be trying to maximise that to the absolute maximum. Never mind £4 million there before it starts peaking. You know, what's wrong with 40, 50, 60 million pounds? We ought to be really sort of letting our aspirations run riot with this. So I hope that's given you a great insight to the 7 steps of innovation, how it can be used, the challenges associated with running innovation projects, and I wish you all the very best for the innovation projects that you're running. What I'm now going to do is connect back with Peter and pick up any questions that you might have sent through and try and do my very best to give you some answers to those. So if you're around, Peter, then if we could chat through any questions that you may have had, we can put some answers to them.
Yes, thank you very much, Steve, for that presentation. Yeah, as I say, We will take any questions now, so if you've got any, do put them in the question section on your dashboard there, and we'll go through those questions. We have got a couple come in, so I'll start off with those. First of all is about R&D tax credits and applications for those. The question is, how do R&D tax credits work, and what are the benefits of them?
Right. When it comes to sort of doing all my R&D tax credits, I tend to use my accountant to sort out the details, because they are evolving and changing, and you need to be aware of them. Fundamentally, as I understand them, where you are spending money on activities that are involved with research and development or your innovation projects, the government will give you a special relief. So they not only do they sort of take the taxation liability away, but they sort of amplify it to give you sort of a credit money back. And therefore, for those activities that you are legitimately undertaking, you can get these special tax dividends back from them, which are well worth having. And really, it would be done through your accountant or your bookkeeper, whoever is responsible for submitting your tax affairs. So they should really be done as part of that sort of process. I mean, there are some people in the marketplace who specialise in doing your R&D tax relief credit calculations for you and submitting that as a separate application. But in a lot of cases, your bookkeeper and accountant should be able to go through the nitty-gritty of the particular expenses that you're incurring, with a view to being able to apply for the R&D tax relief credits against that. So, you know, it's sort of the government contributing towards the R&D work that you're doing, because it's something that they're really wanting to encourage because of the job creation aspects that come off the back of it.
Yeah, certainly. I know I've had a few clients who've used them, and it is a very good scheme. And as you say, you get back more than you actually putting in terms of the research. So it's well worth doing. The only thing I would add to that is you do need to check about grants, because it does preclude you from some grants, because in some ways, because you're getting the money back in terms of the tax relief, it does mean that you haven't spent it, so you can't claim the grants. So one may well preclude you from the other. So if you are looking at R&D tax credits, you do need to do your research in terms of what the best way of funding that research and development is, whether it's the tax credits or whether it's the grants that are out there. So it is something to look into. Another question is about business plans. First one I'll go with is, can you recommend a good business plan template?
The answer to that is no, because I tend to find you need to customize them around the particular thing that you're trying to do. I mean, the business model canvas as an approach and a structure is a great starting position, and it works very well in terms of a new innovation that you might be wanting to work on, because it helps you step back and look at those 9 particular parameters in much more detail. If you are writing a business plan that you're wanting to put in front of investors, then there's an investment plan. If you Google, you'll come up with a number of different templates, and they've all got specific headings on them that are customized to particular applications. You're wanting to sort of take a business plan into a bank or some other sort of or to support an application for funding support. Again, they're often looking for slightly different bits of information, and the important thing really is to understand what you're using it for and what information those organisations that you're giving it to, or those individuals that you're giving it to, want to have from you. So really, what I would say was, there's sort of lots of different ones out there. Hunt around, get a bit of a library, understand what it is that they want from you in terms of information, and try and just adapt, or find one that's close to that and then just adapt it. But there's going to be sort of key stuff in terms of the vision that you've got for your business, the sort of aspirations that you've got and how you might be wanting to fulfill those, the sort of market opportunities that you've got, the resources you're going to have to bring to bear, the financial information in terms of your trading performance, your future sales forecasts, expenditure, cash flow. There's going to be some core information that no matter what business plan you're putting in, you're going to have that in it, plus these additional bits of information that might be specifically beneficial to the organisation that's asking for it.
Yeah, and I think you've also in that one answered the final question that we've got: is a research and development plan the same as a business plan? Which I think, as I say, you've answered in that one. You just need to look at what you're writing the plan for and what it's going to be used for, to see what you need to include and whether it's the same or has some tweaks to it. You agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's right, Peter. I mean, in some cases, an R&D plan can be very tightly bounded, and it's looking at a variety of activities that you would do around the scoping, definition and discovery stages. So it's this is what we're setting out to do, this is the research that we're going to undertake, these are the methods that we're going to be applying in order to do it, these are the resources, the timescales. So you would sort of put a detailed activity plan around the research activities that you'd be undertaking. So that might be sort of quite specific to an innovation project. The business plan side of it tends to look at that exploitation response. So it's very much looking at what the market opportunities will be and what that response might be, that exploitation that you can get from the investment. So anybody who's going to lend money on an investment in an innovation project with all the risks associated with it really wants to have a fundamentally good understanding of what that return is going to be, because they don't want to put something into that isn't going to give them a decent return on it. So your business plan will have much more financial information in it because of that requirement, whereas maybe an R&D plan might be much more focused around the research and development activities you'll be undertaking, how it's bounded, and the specific methods that you would be wanting to use in order to gain the information that you're trying to find.
Thank you very much for that. That's all the questions we have today. So it just gives me to thank you very much, Steve, for giving today's presentation. So a very, very informative presentation there. So thank you very much, Steve. I'd also like to thank everybody for attending today's session. We do have a number of these events coming up on lots of different subjects. So please do visit the humbergrowthhub.org/event, and you'll see the full list of events that are going ahead. I say lots of different topics, so do have a look on there. They are being updated all the time. If anybody would like to access any follow-up one-to-one support, that is also available, and please contact the Growth Hub to make these arrangements. So as I say, thank you very much, Steve, and thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.